I spent a lot of time in Africa growing up, and in Ghana, they have a simple saying that always comes to mind in a situation like this. Twi speakers say this, have this proverb: one must come out of one's house to begin learning. So I think I've already learned a whole lot sitting here with you, and hopefully we'll learn some more. Senator Edwards, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you. Glad to be here. Glad to be here with this great group of progressives, too.
You spent a lot of time highlighting poverty on the campaign trail. We try to do it on our show as regularly as we can, but just so we're all on the same page, paint me a brief portrait of poverty in America today.
Well, actually, I think one of the problems that we face in trying to address this issue nationally is there's a misconception about what poverty is and what the face of poverty is. You know, I think a lot of Americans, if you say the word poverty, and it's one of the reasons, by the way, I think a lot of politicians don't like to use the word, is they immediately in their head paint a picture of the guy that they, or the woman that they had to walk by homeless going to work that morning. And of course that is part of the picture of poverty, but they completely miss the vast majority of people who live in poverty, millions of whom are working, millions of whom are trying to support their families, doing everything they can do. I think they get a misconception about what poverty in America is.
It's people who often really want to work, really want to contribute. That's the misconception that the wider population sometimes misses.
Not just people that want to work, it's people who are working. I'll tell you, I told you this story earlier. We did a television interview before we came here tonight. But I've been a lot of places in America. I don't even know how many now, 150, 200 or more places where they're helping families who are struggling. And just last week I was in Newark, New Jersey, and with a table of about 20, 25 people. Got some New Jersey people here. And there were a bunch of remarkable women around the table. It was mostly women. And there was one woman at the end of the table who told me that she had been a school teacher. She already had one degree. She'd gone back to school to get a different degree. And she had 2 or 3 children, I've forgotten, single mom. She was working 2 jobs, working 50, 60 hours a week, and going to school full time at the same time. And she said, the simplest way I can describe this for you is, I never pay my electric bill or my gas bill until I get the cutoff notice, because otherwise I can't keep up. And this is a perfect example of exactly what I'm describing. Women like that and families like that are in many ways the personification of poverty in America today.
If you use the official figures, I think you come up with like 37 million Americans fall into the official definition of poverty, but statistics can obscure the American reality. You think we should cast the net more widely when trying to count people up?
Oh, it's much broader than that. I mean, that's sort of the core, and that's the starting place. But in terms of addressing these issues, when we think about the policies that we need to have, you know, whether it's unionization, raising the minimum wage, universal health care, all the things that are so desperately needed, we need to think of a much broader population than that 37 million. Now, they're central to it, but they're not all of it. There's a much bigger group than that.
Yeah, the definition, I think, officially is a family of 4 living at under $20,500 a year. Now, you know, especially mature people here in the audience may think, well, 20 grand, you could live on that. Adjust it for inflation. In 1965 dollars, it's $3,000 a year. In 1975 dollars, it's $5,000 a year, a family of 4. You start to see that definition of poverty seems lacking in that context.
Oh, it is. There's absolutely no question about it. I mean, here's the truth. People who are either meet the definition of poverty or are just above it, the millions who are just above it, it takes nothing to put them in the ditch. Nothing. I mean, they live every day on the edge of a razor. If they get, and by the way, you take a solidly middle-class family who has no health care coverage, and you know, they have a child who gets catastrophically sick, and they're straight in the same place. Exactly in the same. Half the bankruptcies in America are caused by health care costs. So what I always say to them, and not to get us off the subject, but what I always say to them, I said to these women in Newark, for example, I say, here's how I want you to think about me. You know, I spent all this time in politics, running for president and vice president, et cetera, remarkably unsuccessfully. And And I said, I want you to think of me as your megaphone, because that is what I am. You know, every story you tell me, like the woman who told me this story that I just conveyed to you, you know, what I can do is if you tell me your story, I can be your voice. I can go across this country, I can get on television, I can speak to millions of Americans, and they will hear what your struggles are. And when they hear your struggles, they'll understand in a much deeper way what it is you're going through and millions like you are going through. And this is why it matters. The policy solutions, and I'm sure we're going to talk about some of those tonight, the policy solutions are important. They're meaningless unless we create the political will to move them. We first have to create the grassroots political movement to get this done. So people have to understand and feel and empathize. I saw this description, I guess about a month ago, interesting description. It said one of the reasons that America has one of the weakest social welfare networks in the industrialized world is because in the industrialized world, we are the most diverse. We have a significant Latino population. We have a significant African American population. We are remarkably diverse. And what that does mentally is people think they're not like me, right? You know, they don't look like me. They don't sound like me. They don't feel like me. They're not like me. Therefore, we collectively don't need to do anything about this. Whereas if you live in Scandinavia, the odds are pretty good they're like you, right? At least superficially. So the bottom line is this. What I believe is one of the most important responsibilities of the next President of the United States, I would argue maybe the most important responsibility, is to convince the American people of a central concept. And that is that we are in this thing together. That what we do as Americans affects every other American. That what happens to every other American affects us. And then the next step, that what happens to children being born in sub-Saharan Africa, in the slums outside of Delhi, in rural China, what's happening across the planet, we are directly tied to. The fate of your family and your children is directly connected to the fate of every other family on the planet. Because when Americans get that, and it is an absolute truth, I mean, there's no question about it. It is true. And if the American people get that, then they'll understand that chest thumping and, you know, we're going to do what we want because we're rich and we're powerful doesn't work. The big problems that face America and face the world, from damage to ecosystems, climate change, population growth in the poorest places on the planet, you know, sub-Saharan Africa being a great example of that, extreme poverty, 1 billion people living on $1 or less a day, 3 billion, half the planet, living on $2 or less a day. You know, unless we deal with these problems collectively, they cannot be solved. However great a nation America is, and it is a great nation, we can't solve these problems alone. It can't be done. And the American people need to feel their connectedness to every other American and every other person on the planet.
I want to get to the politics of that in just a second, but